The wrong door, the right home. The autumn rain tapped softly against the windows of Maple Street, each droplet catching the warm glow of the streetlights. Tommy Chen pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked slowly down the sidewalk, his worn sneakers splashing through small puddles. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper with an address written in fading ink. 12 years old, and carrying everything he owned in a small backpack. Tommy had been living in foster care for as long as he could remember. Today was supposed to be different. Today he was finally going to meet the Johnson family, his new foster parents, who lived at 247 Maple Street. The social worker had told him they were expecting him, that they had prepared a room just for him. Tommy stopped beneath a street light and squinted at the paper again. The rain had made the ink run a little, but he was sure it said 247. He looked up at the house numbers, counting carefully. 243, 245, and then 249. He walked back, checking again. There was number 247. His heart sank as he realized what had happened. The address was smudged, and what he thought was a 7 was actually a 9. But 249 Maple Street looked nothing like what he had imagined. Instead of the bright, welcoming home he had pictured, this house seemed quiet and subdued. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark except for a soft glow from what looked like the living room. Tommy stood at the bottom of the front steps, uncertainty washing over him like the gentle rain. He could walk to the next block and try to find the real address, but it was getting late, and he was tired from carrying his backpack all day. Maybe, he thought, he could just ask to use the phone to call his caseworker. Taking a deep breath, Tommy climbed the wooden steps and knocked gently on the front door. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet evening air. After a few moments he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked surprised to see him standing there, small and wet in the porch light. "Oh my," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle warmth. "Hello there, sweetheart. Are you all right? I'm sorry to bother you," Tommy began, his words coming out in a rush. "I think I'm lost. I was looking for 247 Maple Street, but I can't find it anywhere. Could I maybe use your phone to call someone?" The woman's expression softened even more. "Of course, dear. Come in out of that rain first. Let's get you dried off." She stepped back and opened the door wider. "I'm Margaret, by the way. Margaret Williams." Tommy stepped into the warm entryway, immediately feeling the difference between the cool, damp air outside and the cozy atmosphere inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and old books, and he could hear the soft murmur of a television from another room. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams," Tommy said politely, setting his backpack down carefully. "I'm Tommy." "Well, Tommy, let me get you a towel, and then we'll sort out that phone call." Margaret disappeared for a moment and returned with a fluffy blue towel. "There's number 247 on this street. I'm afraid the house numbers jumped from 245 to 249. Has been that way for as long as I can remember." Tommy's shoulders sagged slightly. He had been so hopeful, so ready to finally have a place to call home, even temporarily. Margaret seemed to notice his disappointment. "Are you waiting for someone, dear family?" Tommy hesitated, then decided to be honest. There was something about Margaret that made him feel safe. "I'm supposed to go to a foster family, the Johnsons, but I think I got the address wrong." Just then, a man appeared from the living room. He was tall and gentle-looking, with wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan sweater that had seen better days. "What's going on, Maggie?" he asked, then noticed Tommy. "Oh, hello there, young man. This is Tommy," Margaret explained to her husband. "He's looking for an address that doesn't exist, and he needs to make a phone call." The man, who introduced himself as Robert Williams, looked at Tommy with the same kind expression his wife had shown. "Of course, the phone's right in the kitchen. But first, have you eaten dinner? You look like you could use a warm meal." Tommy wanted to say no, that he didn't want to be any trouble, but his stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. Both Margaret and Robert chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a yes," Margaret said with a smile. "Robert, why don't you help Tommy with his phone call while I warm up some soup?" As Robert led him to the kitchen, Tommy noticed how quiet the house was, but not in a lonely way. It felt peaceful, like a place where people were comfortable with each other's company. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with photos on the refrigerator and a small herb garden growing on the windowsill. Tommy called his caseworker, but it went straight to voicemail. He left a message explaining the mix-up and sat down at the kitchen table where Margaret had placed a bowl of vegetable soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. "The Johnsons, you said?" Robert asked gently. settling into the chair across from Tommy. I think they live over on Oak Street. That's probably where you need to be. Tommy nodded, taking a spoonful of the soup. It was delicious and warming, and for a moment, he allowed himself to relax. How long have you been in foster care? Margaret asked softly, sitting down with her own cup of tea. Since I was really little, Tommy answered honestly. I don't really remember my birth parents. I've been with a few different families, but it never quite worked out. Margaret and Robert exchanged a look that Tommy couldn't quite interpret. There was sadness there, but also something else. We understand, Robert said quietly. Margaret and I. Well, we always hoped to have children of our own, but it wasn't meant to be. We looked into adoption and fostering years ago, but we were told we were too old. Margaret reached across the table and gently patted Tommy's hand. Sometimes life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need each other most. Tommy looked up from his soup, studying the couple's faces. They seemed lonely, he realized, in the same way he was lonely, not because they were alone, but because there was love in their hearts with nowhere to go. Would you like me to drive you over to Oak Street? Robert offered. I'm sure the Johnsons are wondering where you are. Tommy nodded, but found himself reluctant to leave the warm kitchen and these kind people who had welcomed him without question. The ride to Oak Street was quiet, with Margaret sitting in the back seat next to Tommy while Robert drove carefully. Through the gentle rain, when they found the right address, the house was lit up and clearly waiting for someone. But as Tommy stood on the sidewalk with his backpack, looking at the Johnson house, something didn't feel right. It wasn't that the house looked unwelcoming, it was nice enough. But after spending just an hour with Margaret and Robert, everything else seemed less right. Tommy, Margaret said gently. Are you okay? Tommy turned to look at her, and then at Robert, who had gotten out of the car and was standing nearby with a concerned expression. Mrs. Williams, Tommy said slowly, when you said you and Mr. Williams looked into fostering ... Did you mean you're not foster parents now? No, dear, Margaret replied. We were told we were too old, and that was several years ago. We're probably too old now, certainly. Tommy felt something shift inside his chest, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. What if age doesn't matter as much as people think? What if what matters is having people who care? Robert stepped closer, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Tommy, are you saying what I think you're saying? I know I just met you, Tommy said, the words coming out in a rush. And I know this is crazy, but sitting in your kitchen, eating that soup ... It felt more like home than anywhere I've ever been. I knocked on the wrong door, but maybe it was the right door after all. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she knelt down so she was at Tommy's eye level. Sweetheart, fostering isn't that simple. There are rules, and paperwork, but we could try, couldn't we? Robert interrupted gently. We could call the caseworker. We could ask Tommy. It looked between them, hope looming in his chest like a flower after rain. You would want to really... Tommy, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. We've been waiting our whole lives for someone like you to knock on our door. The rain had stopped, and stars were beginning to appear between the clouds. Tommy looked back at the Johnson house, then at Margaret and Robert Williams, and he knew with absolute certainty where he belonged. Sometimes, he thought as they walked back to the car together, the wrong door is exactly the right door, after all.